Hi everyone, welcome again to AuthorStory. I'm Alexander Lim, your host, and on this episode, I'm interviewing Jackson Fahnestock, author of the novel Shu Wei's Revenge. You can go over now to the Amazon link in the description below the video and check out or get a copy of this book. So, Jackson, welcome to AuthorStory. Thanks for being our guest.
Thank you, Alex. Good to be here, talk to you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So first off, Jackson, let me just ask. I got your last name right, right? Fahnestock.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay. All right. Got that.
Very few people get that right.
Okay. Well, we do try. So, Jackson, for starters, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What's your author story?
Well, I've always liked to write. I was an architect and urban planner for many years. For 35 years, actually, and I did some writing, very little writing, actually, here and there, and I enjoyed it. I liked it. And then it came time to face the music several years ago when I found out I had prostate cancer. I then retired. Yeah, that was a big shock. So I
Can imagine.
decided I should retire and try to do some things that I really had always wanted to do. One of which was writing. I didn't get to it right away because I started out on a long journey of doing some artwork and recording some audio tours of historic San Francisco. So I started research though some 12, 14 years ago, even on this book.
Whoa.
I had done a lot of work in China and in Taiwan and in Vietnam for projects that I worked on. So that sort of really kindled my interest and my, urge to try to put something together eventually. I brought back a lot of great memories. I found the Asian culture, which I had not had a lot of insights on until I did that work. But I brought back a lot of very vital information that I could use as a base for the book. And this was very enlightening as far as an experience goes, but also just to explore another culture. And I think a lot of people, I'm Caucasian, by the way. You probably can tell by the picture. But there are ways to write books that stay within what I call within your skin, and then there are ways to just do things that are not in your comfort zone. And I think it was a challenge to me, really, because I felt that some writing should be sort of a challenge, and it's all a challenge. But writing about another culture is certainly not easy. So I had to do a lot of research in local libraries here in San Francisco, the Chinese Historical Society Museum. I spoke to a lot of my Chinese friends. I had done a lot of, I'd had a lot of communication with professionals overseas in Asia. And I'd interacted with a lot of the local communities because urban planning requires a lot of back and forthing with the community in these projects. And these were large mixed use transportation projects, so they would go through different communities. They were rail projects. So I had that base that I built up, and I felt that it would be really unique and interesting if I should start to use that. And so about 4 years ago, I think I really, started in earnest on this project. It wasn't until I had done a lot of that base research that I felt I was comfortable to move forward.
Okay.
So that was kind of where it all started. There's a lot more to it, but
Okay, so if I might ask, what sort of stuff did you write before? I mean, did you write anything like poetry, fiction, anything along those lines, or was it like, architectural journals and stuff like that?
Well, I did some of the journals. I wrote for the American Institute of Architects. I put together a book called To Preserve a Heritage, which was a book of renovation and renewal of a lot of historic properties in Lower Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for the city of New York for a period of years, and that was very rewarding. And I've always had a very strong, deep interest in historic properties and historic issues. And in fact, in my travels in Asia, the most interesting things to me, even though I consider myself more of a modernist in terms of architecture, the most interesting parts to me were the historic parts.
Mm-hmm.
And I also wrote, I had a traveling scholarship to study abroad from Columbia University in the 60s, which is decades ago. But that thesis really, again, woke up my writing instincts, and it had to get into the study of several downtown parts of major cities in Europe, and that was well received by my scholarly people that I had to report to.
Yeah.
So it's been on and on, mostly nonfiction.
Okay.
So I said, well, nonfiction's too easy. Let's do some fiction.
Okay. All right. So I have to ask. I mean, this is a novel. I mean, this is not like a nonfiction book. Did you have any influences or any favorite authors, fiction authors, that might have influenced your style of writing?
Well, I don't know about the style. I've always enjoyed Paul Theroux's travel writing. Dave Eggers. I've read several of his. I like to read a variety of books, young adult books, because this is young adult. In fact, I've just read some Harry Potter and things of that sort. So I like to read a variety of books. I don't like to get sort of stuck in a rut and read one style. But I think there are so many influences in these, not only those books, but in many others I've read, that you're grabbing onto subconsciously, and you're not really aware of what those are going to do in your book. So you're kind of tucking them away and hoping that they can help you through this whole process.
All right. Okay. Cool. I got that. So it's kind of like it really is kind of like your own style then.
I think so. I mean,
Cool.
I was helped a great deal by my editor, and I worked with her for a year. And Linda Watanabe McFerrin, I'll give her a plug. She was great because the initial draft of the book was a bit rough and a bit crude, I should say. I don't know about crude, but it was far from being a real novel. And
Right.
she was able to kind of sort out the pieces and put them back together in a more meaningful way, and actually kind of, give it a good diet because it was way too heavy.
Right.
It was too wordy, and which is one of my problems over time. I tended to kind of drone on in my writing. So she was able to kind of take that and wrestle it to the ground, and I think it came out so much better. So there was a whole process. When you haven't written before a novel, writing nonfiction is totally different, as you know.
Yes.
When you haven't written a novel, there's so many terminologies and different just sort of nomenclatures that you come across I was not even aware of. So I took a writing workshop with her, and again, did a whole lot of editing and reworking over that period of a year. But even then, it's still sort of a rough draft.
Right.
And eventually it kind of formed into something that I was happy with.
Okay. Nice. So, Jackson, for the benefit of our listeners who probably haven't heard of your novel, can you give us a short summary of what it's all about?
Yeah, sure. it really is sort of a coming of age. I mean, there are several sub themes to it, but it's a young adult novel based in 1898. It starts in China.
Mm-hmm.
It's about a young man who's 17 years old, who gets into a bit of a bind as with his position as a public scribe in a small town in China.
Mm-hmm.
And he finds then he has to emigrate along with his family to San Francisco's Chinatown because his father's store was burned, and the town council, who ended up being criminal elements, actually necessitated that move. So they all came across and landed in San Francisco. But on the way over, one of the town council members, who was a crooked one of the people who actually burned down his father's store,
Mm-hmm.
ended up on the ship and tormented Shu Wei all the way across, and under threat of death told him that he would need to help him uncover some misdeeds on the part of his partners. So there's irony in that.
All right.
So when he gets to Chinatown, he of course confronts the usual transitional turmoil of landing in a new place, although he's fortunately supported by some of the local community.
Mm-hmm.
And he lands a job with the local newspaper, the Chinese American paper, and in fact that was an actual paper at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also cornered and caught up in a tong, which was the fellow that I mentioned before was one of the leaders of. So he's kind of a double agent because he wants to get a story to enable himself to bring down this tong.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an entire series of drama, mystery, kind of a back and forth of intercultural and intracultural
All right.
kind of situations where he makes friends with an Irishman who previously had come after him in a very negative way.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an element of cultural interface that I thought was kind of unfolded. Sometimes you don't know these things are even unfolding until you work them in, and then you work through them as you go. And the whole notion of a free press is a very dominant part of this, where he's able to make big strides in terms of coming after these Tong members who have been hounding him and making life very difficult. And so there's that element. There's also the element of the enslaved girls who were brought in from various places and made to work in very abusive conditions in Chinatown. And one of the main characters, Grace Caldwell, who actually is Donaldino Cameron, a historic figure who is a real person. She shepherds a lot of these girls. She actually rescues these girls in a lot of cases, so that they can then survive and begin to lead a more productive life. And I should add, Shu Wei has a sister who comes with him, and I won't get into all of that detail, but she's also sort of the moral backbone of Shu Wei. Shu Wei, well, not the moral background, but she tends to be uplifting to him, but she's also puzzled by why he can't tell her everything, and so there's a frustration. So I think there's one other thing which I won't go into, which involves a murder a long time ago, which Shu Wei gets involved in solving. So there's something for everyone.
Right.
But that's the essence of it, and I won't do any spoilers here. I won't,
of course,
give away the end, but it's just a struggle for him, and he finds different avenues to try to recapture his honor, basically.
Yeah. I must say, this novel has a lot of elements on it, and that's for me. That's kind. I find it a little bit kind of unusual for first-time novelists, because usually, like first-time novelists, when they start off, their stories are kind of simple, kind of straightforward, and it's only later as they get more experience that things they add more elements in. But this one, this has quite a few elements in it.
Well, it may still have, I don't know. Some people may judge it as having too many elements. Actually, before, had you read it before, I'd had friends say, well, actually, there's like 3 or 4 stories here.
Mm-hmm.
But as I say, I worked with an editor to sort of cleanse the book of all of that. I had
Right.
spent probably too much time on the ship on the way over because I'm fascinated with mechanical aspects of a ship
Right.
and how it works. And, I got into great depth on, what the captains had for dinner at the table and everything. So I think it's a manageable series of pieces now
Mm.
where it's recognized as a whole.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. I mean, I never thought it would be this complex,
Right.
but you don't know until you get into it where it's headed. So it hopefully will people will find it enjoyable from all standpoints.
Cool. Cool. Definitely. So, Jackson, this novel is set in the historical past, like 1898. This time was like the last years of the Qing Dynasty. San Francisco is expanding with the Chinese, immigrants in general at the time. What made you decide to set the story in this particular time?
Well, it was a period, there was something called the 103-day episode where the Qing dynasty, they were trying to get rid of the Western influences, and they had, there was a major political and cultural and social movement to try to do that, mostly in the North.
Mm.
Um, but some of the people that were involved in trying to carry out those that sort of movement had drifted away and were kind of catching smaller fish in the nets.
Mm.
And one of those, or several actually of those, had come south into the town where Shu Wei lived,
Mm.
and they ended up being the source of his and major, agony.
Mm.
And also on the other side of the ocean in Chinatown, there were lots of things going on. There was a lot of turmoil. You couldn't, of course, bring in the Chinese were not really welcomed in America because they were seen as taking jobs from Americans, and
All right.
so it was very difficult to get into the country in the first place. But if you had connections with one of the society groups in Chinatown, you would have a lot better chance, and that's how Shu Wei and his family ended up coming in.
Mm.
So on both sides of the water, there were some very delicate and intense conditions, and I think it sort of raised the level of the tension on
Mm.
all parts of the story.
Mm. Okay. All right. I got that. So, Jackson, reading the book, what struck me about the characterization that this is really like the story of a Chinese guy. It's not like some Western story transplanted in Chinese Oriental culture. And this is also about interface between, as you mentioned, the interface between Western and Chinese culture. And I have to say, it comes across pretty realistically to me. So, was it difficult writing those aspects out?
Oh yeah, it was every day that I felt that this is something that not everyone does.
Hmm.
And that particularly, as I said before, are Caucasian. And there was a recent article by a New York Times writer who said that culture should be shared, not hoarded. And what he meant to say there is, or what he did say there is, he felt that too often that we can't talk about other cultures without having lived and absorbed them personally and natively. So that knowing that comforted me, because he made many good points in his article about that, and I felt, well, okay, that makes me feel better. But yeah, it's always a trial because you're facing your own instincts and urges to move on, even though you think that, well, you need to really research this, and which I did. I spent many hours researching various aspects of Asian culture, and of course, as I said before, I spent many months traveling and living over there. So this is as close as I probably could have gotten in my situation. There will not be an in-depth sort of overview of certain aspects of Chinese culture. I must say there are some that were really near and dear to me, and that includes some of the singing that was done in the book by a choir of the Occidental Home, which is the one I mentioned that really Grace Caldwell, the head of the home, runs. And the singing, the Beijing choir, the children's choir, I don't think we have links to give out, but when I put that part of the story together, I researched a lot of the songs, and there were some, songs in English that were included in the book as well. But that to me was really a very personal story that I really enjoy. Part of the story that I enjoyed researching, because I love the younger girls singing. I've done a lot of mentoring of people, younger people in the past, and so part of the story really is trying to get inside the culture, but also getting inside things that aren't directly associated, where they can add something, some element of more depth. So that's, I'm not sure I answered your question directly, but it's not, certainly not an easy task,
Right.
because you can research and research and research, and then you end up going off wiki-like, as my editor said. You're looking into Wikipedia too much, and then it starts to sound like it. So.
Right. Okay, so Jackson, as a person, what was the thing that you found most fascinating when you were doing research for the book?
Well, if you include my travels in that question, I would have to say that I was just totally absorbed in just everyday life in China and Hong Kong in particular, where I spent at one point 4 months living and working on this project. And I would, even though I was working a lot, I would be able to get out and go into different communities and just observe, just sort of not even I'd take mental notes. I'd take mainly mental notes, and I think that to me was really quite, as I said before, it became the base for all of this. The sights, the sounds, the smells, the cultural traditions, and and this included Hanoi and Taipei as well. So that was one part, but I love to research, and that sometimes is my downfall, because I can get off, I can sidetrack myself, but all of a sudden I realize, well, wait a minute, where did I start? You know,
Right, right.
and I'm sure that some authors could find that to be true as well, because when you're researching an historical novel,
Mm.
you can't afford to be wrong.
Yeah.
At least in the overall, big picture.
Hmm.
Some of the details, obviously, you have the right to be somewhat more, free with. You're not going
Right.
to be. I'm giving different names to real people.
Hmm.
I'm making some assessments of maybe what some of the cultural movements were at the time. But
Right.
overall, you've got to spend enough time on it. If you're writing a contemporary novel, it's different. And I kept saying to myself all the way along, it would be a whole lot easier if I were writing something about present day San Francisco, which is where I live.
Right.
But another piece of that is we do have a very large Chinatown here.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I spent a lot of time in Chinatown, and I have friends who have family there.
Hmm.
And so that was another part of it. But it's all consuming. You never come to quite the point where you're running out of places to research, which
Yeah.
is a real problem, really.
Yeah, it's a matter of focusing on what fits and editing out everything else, no matter how interesting.
Right, right.
Right, cool. So, Jackson, in the last few minutes of this interview, are there any last words of wisdom you would like to share to inspire our listeners? It doesn't have to be related to the book; it could be related to your life experience.
Well, I think I've never had terribly easy. My family didn't have much money, and so I ended up kind of struggling, all the way through school. I had to have a job when I went to college, and I got some scholarships, fortunately. I came to Columbia University with virtually no money, and they kind of looked at me like I was crazy. And
Mm.
they finally said, okay, you're here, we'll try to make it work.
Mm.
But I think the point is that perseverance is of course the natural thing you'd say, but it's kind of beyond that. When I found out I had cancer, it kind of tore me apart at the time.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I was fortunate, I had a lot of good family support. And that drove me on. And even though I had a series of treatments over the past, 14 years, really,
Hmm.
um, I kept thinking, well, I'm not sure I'm going to make it to the end of this book.
Hmm.
And but that was also an incentive. So I kept getting new treatments and new medicine would come along and so forth. And so right now, actually, I'm in a good position with it,
Mm.
fortunately. And I am fortunate because it started out being a very, very, severe type of cancer.
Right.
So I felt that there are things that kind of pull you along in life, and I think that had to be the one. And it's very energizing to get to this point where you actually think that you've not overcome necessarily this condition, but that you'd managed it and you've done things that you thought you might never do. So it's really as I say, it's beyond sort of a conviction. It's kind of something that's way deep inside that I've always felt that I've been a bit driven. I'm introverted, as I was listening to an interview that David Axelrod had with Anderson Cooper the other day, and he said he's very introverted, but he had a lot of tragedy in his life, but he was able to kind of he was driven. I mean, he was driven to get beyond it. So I'm not saying it takes a medical disaster or tragedy or anything of that sort to do this,
Hmm.
but don't give up is the answer. You know, it's never the end unless, you know, it's the end. So yeah,
Right.
that's a crude way of putting it, but I think people who have things that are troubling them or holding them back need to basically look a little bit beyond it and try to work with it.
Right. Okay. Well, those are great words of wisdom right there. I mean, hard to argue with that kind of experience and that kind of wisdom.
Thank you. Well, yeah, and I had a tremendously enjoyable 35 years in architecture and urban planning, and I continue to serve on some committees related to some of my work that I have done locally. So I keep active in the community. I think that's the other thing that is important to try to keep active and try to serve in some way, even though I don't do any more mentoring. I used to do mentoring and some very personal work with students.
Right.
But I think, you know, a good balance in what you're trying to do, so you're not plugged in all the time, frantically trying to write.
Right.
You need to get out and do other things.
Right. Okay. Cool. Got that. So, in closing, then, the book is Shu Wei's Revenge. The authors are guest Jackson Fahnestock. And you can find this book on such websites as Amazon, Barnes& Noble, and Smashwords. So, Jackson, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being Author Story. It was pretty fun having you with us today.
All right. Thanks very much, Alex.
You're welcome. So if any of you listeners want to get this novel, please feel free to go ahead and check out Shu Wei's Revenge, which you can do so right now by going to the Amazon link in the description below the video. And if you'd like to follow our author interviews on YouTube, I invite you to subscribe to our channel. So bye for now, everyone. I'll be back next time on Author Story with another inspiring author.